Welcome. I'm Maritza Guridy. I'm the Deputy Director of Parent Voice for the National Parents Union. Thank you so very much for joining us today, both online and in this wonderful studio here at PBS 39 in Bethlehem. I am so pleased to introduce to today's program called What Do PA Charter Schools Have in Common with School Districts? The answer is more than you think. We are here today because Children First and its PA Charter Performance Center are releasing a new report on how well charter schools have lived up to their promise, followed by a panel of experts. I think most people here already know Children First, which was formerly known as PCCY, for over 40 years. This organization has served as the leading advocate for children. I first became aware of Children First through their Parent and Kinship Action Lab. I am now taking part in the Empowerment Fellowship to become a better advocate for our children and the communities in which they live. Education is clearly one of those issues. I have 5 children and they have had a variety of different experiences. My older children attended charter schools and my younger children are now enrolled in the Philadelphia School District. In my experience, there are a couple of key things that make or break a school regardless of whether it is a charter school or not. First, does it have a welcoming environment? Second, is there transparency so parents have good information and know what's happening at their school? Sharing good information is the main reason we are all here today. ML Wernecke, the center's director and author of the report, will kick us off with a summary of the new report and its recommendations. Let me turn it over to ML.
Thanks so much, Maritza. When Pennsylvania passed the charter school law in 1997, it was clear that the intent that the legislators had was not just to create more of the same, but instead they adopted a framework that allowed schools to have more flexibility so that they could use innovative educational models and develop new teaching methods, all with the goal of improving student learning. Now, this is true for all students, but it was especially true that there's a goal to improve student learning for Black students, Hispanic students, and low-income students. As Maritza said, we're here today to check in on how the charter school promise has been fulfilled, specifically for brick and mortar charter schools. And we do that with data, specifically 5 years of PSSA data that's broken out by those student groups that I just mentioned, covering the period of 2015 to 2019. Why did we end in 2019? Well, because like many things, COVID got in the way. There were no tests in 2020 because of COVID. In 2021, there were tests, but the testing rate was so low as to make the tests unreliable. And while recently data came out for 2022, it came out too late to be included in the analysis, and we suspect that it will probably mostly show impacts from the pandemic as opposed to the questions we're asking here today. Our central finding is looking at the 5 years of data that over half of Black, Hispanic, and low-income charter school students are failing in English, and 3 in 4 are failing in math. Now, these charts show the percentage of charter school students by the different student groups that are failing in English and math over the 5-year period, 2015 to 2019. The English scores are on the left, the math scores are on the right. And as I started at the beginning to say, they're both, the fail rates are too high for both English and math. It's important to remember that charter schools are not a monolith. And that previous slide I showed you was wrapping up all schools statewide, broken out by those different student groups. But in reality, we know performance varies. And there are a number of higher quality charter schools where at least half the students have passed the English PSSA, meaning they scored proficient or advanced in English. But when we look at individual the student groups, we find that the failure rate for Black charter school students over time is unchanged over that 5-year period. This is true in math, which is the top line in blue, and it's also true for English, the lower line in green. If charter schools were improving the performance, you would expect to see a lower failure rate over time, more students succeeding, fewer students failing. Similarly, we got virtually identical results, no progress for low-income charter school students. And for Hispanic charter school students, there's a slightly different story where you can see a slow trend for the failure rate to decline from 87 to 84% for math and 66 to 62% in English. So it is a decrease, and you can see the line going down. However, it's a relatively slow decrease. So in addition to looking at the state results for these student groups, we also took a deeper dive into 4 school districts: Pittsburgh, Chester Upland, Allentown, and Philadelphia. And as you can see, the 4 groups are here. In Pittsburgh, they are authorized 7 charter schools. And in each case, the school district line is shown in green. For Pittsburgh, you see some of the charter schools have a lower failure rate. For Black students, some of the charter schools have a higher failure rate. And that story's repeated for Chester Upland and Allentown. For Philadelphia, because there are so many charters, 73 charters, we couldn't graph them in exactly the same way. So as in rolling them up, the result is a little bit different. The district has a higher failure rate than for the charter school aggregate. So this is a snapshot. And we wanted to compare head-to-head charter schools versus school districts in each of these 4 school districts. Let's now take a look at what happens going over time. The overall conclusion that I take away from looking at this slide is that the school districts, which are shown again in green, and the charter schools, they're moving in virtual lockstep across most of these school districts. There's very little change, very little differential between these school districts. If you were expecting that the charter school model would produce improved student learning outcomes, you would think you would see that they would have a lower failure rate and that failure rate would be decreasing. Instead, you see very similar failure rates and in Philadelphia's case, again, very little change over time, again, with the school district failure rate exceeding the charter school failure rate. So we're here today not to talk about funding and funding solutions. However, it is important to know at what cost we are getting these results. And at a statewide level, payments to charter schools totaled $2.6 billion in 2021. For our 4 school districts, you can see how much they pay in particular to the brick and mortar charter schools. And what does that mean in terms of percentage of their total expenditures? As you can see here, in both Chester Upland and Philadelphia have a higher percent of their total expenditures, which makes sense because they have relatively more charter school students than Allentown and Pittsburgh. But even in the lower ranked schools, Allentown and Pittsburgh, meaning lower charter school tuition as a percent of total expenditures, you're talking about real money. Now, funding is important because we believe, and as many people believe, that funding affects the outcomes. And that's why we conclude here that academic success for students attending charter schools is inextricably linked to the funding for all public school students, for all public schools rather. And this is particularly true for charter schools, given the way that they get their money. Charter school funds are calculated based on how much the school district gets to spend. If school district spending is low, the amount that the charter schools get is going to be low as well, which leads to the first recommendation. In order to try to do a better job living up to the promises that we've made to Black, Hispanic, and low-income students, we think we should address the structural and funding barriers that limit the progress of all schools. Everybody here has heard about the lawsuit, read about the lawsuit, attended webinars about the lawsuit. And one of the major conclusions was that Pennsylvania doesn't meet the need of all of its students from low wealth districts, which tends to be a high proportion of Hispanic and low income students. We know that a lot of money is required to address this gap. And we know that now that public schools have a shared interest in closing that gap, and not just school districts, but all public schools. It's probably one of the ways that I would say that public schools and charter schools have more in common than you might think. The second recommendation is to amend PA charter school law to expand high quality charter schools and turn around or close low performing charter schools. Now think back to the beginning of the presentation where we showed charter schools are not a monolith and there are a number of high performing schools as well. That of course is the objective. And so to do that, we believe that there should be a framework adopted that would, one, approve only high quality charter school applicants, and then let those high performers grow. At the same time, protecting students of color and the taxpayers by closing failing charter schools. Is a very common sense framework, but it's not just something someone thought up. At least 23 states have taken steps in this direction, and it's time for Pennsylvania to do the same. Finally, we argue that Pennsylvania should implement an accountability matrix to give local school districts the information to make good decisions. Now, Pennsylvania's charter school law puts the responsibility in the hands of the local school districts, but it doesn't exactly say what standards or performance metrics that they should use or that they should be given that data. Clearly, we think that the information will help them make better decisions and ensure that students of color get a better education, and that that information needs to be not just PSSA scores, but cover a bunch of different dimensions as shown on this slide. So at this point, I want to wrap up the presentation by thanking the Ivywood Foundation, who has made this event today possible and who has also made the work of the PA Charter Performance School possible. You'll all get a copy of the report via email, and you can also download it or use the QR code here. So at this point, I want to introduce the panel. And we have a terrific panel today, representative of different players in this whole conversation. And we'll start out with Dr. Ann. I'm going to just briefly introduce all four and then turn it over to the panel to take it on. So Dr. Ann Clark is the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools, which is the state's largest and most active charter organization in advocacy and in training. Next to Dr. Clark is Dr. Joseph Roy, Superintendent of the Bethlehem Area School District. And on the end, we have Melissa Suarez, a parent leader from Philadelphia, who'll talk from a parent perspective. We're pleased today to wrap up that part of the panel with Representative Joe Ciresi from the 146th District in Montgomery County. Priyanka Reyes-Kaura will close everything up for us. So let me turn it over to Dr. Clark.
Thank you so much, Mel. I appreciate it. I am Dr. Annie Clark, the CEO of the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools, but I'm also a parent, a grandparent. I've been an educator for 22 years, a community leader. And I'm definitely an advocate for 183 charter schools in Pennsylvania to serve 170,000 students out of the 1.5 million children who attend Pennsylvania schools. The PSC, the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools, recently received a $30 million grant from the United States Department of Education for us to expand, grow, and replicate high-quality charter schools. At this time, we have 6 charter schools who have received that grant, and we have 7 more additional charter schools who will be receiving that grant this year. We believe in high quality standards also. I believe that we are here today as a starting point for this conversation of what does high quality education look like in Pennsylvania. I do not believe that there is a single educator anywhere who believes that an assessment really depicts what children do, what teachers do, what schools do, and what communities do. Now, I'm not implying that assessments aren't critical. They are critical. They give us a data point, give a baseline to where we should start from and where we should go to. I've been also looking at the data from the 21-22 building data, and it does create an interesting perspective for me. Some of the things that I have found is that we have nearly 1,500 students who are below, 1,500 schools, which are below the state average. Do we really believe that we have 1,500 failing schools in Pennsylvania? Because if we do, that really changes the conversation. We also have found in that bottom 15% in Pennsylvania schools, 84% of them are traditional publics. Now, I'm not saying that just our traditional publics are failing. What I'm saying is that the conversation is very complex. We are not making cans. We are educating children. The data is not going to always go up or go down because children are learning or not learning. Data can stay consistent because the children themselves change. I believe that the Future Ready Index has given us a deep dive into what schools are looking at. One of the things that the coalition has been able to do, since we have 6 grantee schools, there's a very clear process that we have to do to, one, monitor the schools, and then also look at the high quality standards. What we have found is that in most cases, there is very consistent policies, procedures, finance, academics. But what we find that really stands out for us in our charter schools is the innovation piece. I think that it's amazing to me that I've been able to travel to approximately 60 of our charter schools in the last year, and every one of them is different. And I don't mean in just the sense that the building looks different or the teachers are different, the children are different, the communities are different, and what each school needs is something different. It's great to be able to visit a school that's built on leadership. It's great to be able to go see a school that's built on environmental studies. It's great to be able to go to STEAM schools and art schools and technology schools. And I think all of us believe that children should be able to pursue the things that they love and are excited about. And that occurs more likely in a charter school because that's its design. The design was not to pass the PSSAs. Nowhere in the school law does it say that. What it says is that we are to be innovative in our practices. One of the things that was very interesting to me is we are in a critical area of teacher shortage. We have now more teachers being emergency certified than actually applying for traditional certification. If we do not do something drastic in the next year or two, we will not have enough teachers in Pennsylvania to run any of our schools. What will that do to education? And a lot of times people will say, well, charter schools don't have certified teachers or the same amount. And that is and isn't true. Charter schools are allowed to have 75% certified teachers. The other 25% are made up of what's called high quality teachers. It doesn't mean they don't have a degree. They do have a degree, a bachelor's degree. The only difference is they don't have a teaching certificate. Why is that important? If you are teaching engineering, would you rather have a certified elementary school teaching engineering, or would you rather have an engineer teaching engineering? If you are teaching medical, would you rather have someone who thinks they're teaching medical from a book, or would you rather have someone who's actually studied medicine? I think that we understand why 25% of the teachers are to be high quality and not certified. I wanted to say what is happening to our children across our country and in the Commonwealth. And there's really very sad things that happen. I didn't realize that we had 1.4 million crimes occur in our schools in the United States. I think that really tells us something. 1 in 4 4-year-olds will have a traumatic event occur. We just came through the worst experience any of us had as educators during the COVID-19 pandemic. I had been in education for 22 years and led a charter school in York, who I loved. And I came out bewildered and exhausted and just not sure of where education's going to go. And fortunately, I was able to get into this position with the coalition. And in my first 3 visits to charter schools, the CEOs were crying, not because they didn't love their schools, but because what they had just experienced was life-changing and draining. We have so much that we need to work on collectively for children, for teachers, for our school leaders. We cannot afford to lose a single school leader in Pennsylvania, not a charter school leader, not a superintendent. All that happens when this occurs is the schools get worse because that leader is not in place. When we talk about high quality standards, nowhere in there does it ever say PSSAs. Academics is not based off of testing. It is based off of culture. It is based off curriculum. It's based off pedagogy. It's based off of how we manage it and the effectiveness of it. And so I thought that was really interesting that when we speak about academics in Pennsylvania, we always go to the PSSAs. And yet we're never really talking about what matters in the classroom. If I walked in a classroom to observe a teacher right now, the first thing that I look at is children. Why? Because children never lie. If they're engaged, if they're sitting up, if they're learning, you can see that in their children's eyes. If I walk into a classroom and the children are laying over, they're running around the room, it clears a very picture about what's happening in that classroom. Effective leadership is part of high quality. Does that school leader have the experience that they need to run a school, to run a district? And charter schools really are districts. They are also everything that their charter school, a school has to do, they also have to do everything a district has to do. The only difference is scale. In addition to that, we have adopted, the Pennsylvania Coalition of Public Charter Schools has adopted national high quality standards. We have been working with the charter schools in Pennsylvania for the last 6 months on the high quality standards. We have been able to identify 25 charter schools for various reasons that we know do hit these high quality standards. And right now, those charter schools are collecting evidence of a couple hundred documents in order for myself, my colleague, Cheryl Johnson-Watts, to be able to go out and to make sure that we can assess the high quality of the school. We are proud to assist in this critical conversation, and we will go anywhere that is needed to have this conversation about what is great for children. We walked into this position seeing that there are a need for a matrix. I agree with that. I've already started one about a year ago when I came into this position. We've identified 23 areas that school leaders need assistance with in order to run a school. And that's not just a charter school, that's any school. One of the things that we had found while developing the matrix is that in some areas like leadership and parent engagement, many school leaders identify themselves as really being high quality in that area. But there was other areas that no one considered themselves high quality, and one was board development. Now, why is that so critical? You know who authorizes charter schools? Boards. And there's no training for our authorizers in Pennsylvania, not really. I wanted to speak a little bit more about the law itself of charter schools. Basically, the law comes down to this, that our schools are to create opportunities for children. I can guarantee you that in the 60 charter schools that I walked into, opportunities were present. I can also guarantee you that the school was safe. In fact, I've gone into schools that are safer than any school I've ever imagined. There's 2-3 doors that you have to get through to get in. There's school leaders and secretaries and janitors and security who are there to greet children outside every day. You will see that at every charter school. There are increased learning opportunities because children are able to study the things that encourage and excite them. And doesn't say anywhere state testing. We must find practices in our school, regardless if it is traditional, public, public charter or cyber schools or private that are best practices. I wanted to say that one of the philosophies that I've always followed myself is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And why Maslow is so important is that he studied children. I mean, that's the whole point of it. And the first thing that children need to be successful is food. They need those basic needs met. They need to be able to come into an environment and eat. Many of our urban areas, for many years, that wasn't true. And I'm proud of the governor for extending free breakfast to every child and moving that into the classroom. The second thing that children need is safety. A lot of parents choose charter schools because they're safe, because they're based off of relationships with the child, with the teacher, with the parent, with the community. Next, you have to belong. That means you have to have pride in what's happening in that building. Uniforms do create that. I know not all children like uniforms, and a lot of charter school children will tell you they don't like uniforms. But what it does do is it gives them an identity. They belong to that school, either because of their jacket or their tie, and belonging is critical. They need love. They need acceptance. They need to be accepted exactly the way they are, not the way we want them to be. And when those things are all met, children are then able to learn. So I want you to think about that for a minute. Have you walked into the schools in your own community? And how many people that are speaking about charter schools have never walked into a charter school? So I'm going to encourage that anyone who has an opinion on our charter schools in Pennsylvania, step one, please go visit some charter schools, because what you're going to find is that they put children first. They are safe and children are learning, which is what matters to me. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation.
Dr. Roy?
Thank you. So yeah, just highlighting the things that are in common, what do we have in common? I totally agree about not focusing on PSSA results. A single test given once a year, which is coming up next week for many of us, is not an accurate representation. And also when we look at only the PSSA achievement side, because we do have the growth measures. And often schools, many of the charter schools that are in urban areas and the urban districts, they can demonstrate growth in students, but they may not be at grade level or at proficient in the PSSAs. So, growth is really important. And maybe if there's a future look at this data, it includes growth, and it's highlighted because the other thing that charters in public schools in urban areas have is that the kids that come to them face a lot of obstacles and a lot of challenges to their learning, because they're coming from high poverty areas, which usually means there's not sufficient social services, not access to safe housing or affordable housing. There's not sufficient access to food for families. So all of those challenges that students living in urban areas face are common challenges for charters and for public schools. And I think the idea of choice is important and is common, but I think what's mistaken is the tremendous array of choice that's available in public schools, the range of courses, the range of programs for students to pursue. For example, our Liberty and Freedom High Schools offer 200 different courses. So there's a wide range of choice within schools, but choice is important. I think where the differences come is really in the financing. It's the way that charters are financed that strap public schools. And so, recommendations, like some of the recommendations that were made in this report, I think are helpful. One recommendation I would make is reinstating the state reimbursement to school districts for charter students, which was cut in 2010. That blew a hole in districts' budgets, and as costs have increased, it's been more of a pressure on districts. That just went away and never came back. That significantly increases the pressure. Also, we know that there are financial overpayments to charter schools for special education students. Charter schools get paid by a different formula, get reimbursed, I would say, by a different formula than school districts do. And that law that reimburses school districts based on the 3 categories and the needs of those actual students, the actual cost to educate those students, ought to be applied to charter schools as well. To me, that's low-hanging fruit. That's a no-brainer. That would save districts millions of dollars. So the challenge, I think, is that we have a $2.5 billion, pushing $3 billion privately run charter school system that is not demonstrating any better results than the public schools, while at the same time handicapping the public schools by having to send that $2.5 billion out the door. And so it's the funding of the system that creates the biggest negative impacts, I think, on the public schools. In Bethlehem, for example, we receive last year or this year, current year, about $46.5 million in basic education funding from the state of Pennsylvania. $35 million is our tuition bill. So the $46 million that we received, and charter students are counted in the ADM for the BEF, for the basic education funding, not to get too technical. Sorry about that. But that basic education money from the state includes in the enrollment of charter students. Okay, but 75% of that money goes right out the door to pay charter tuition for the 2,000 students that are in charter schools, leaving the 13,000 students with only 25% of the basic education funding for the state. So in Allentown, my neighbor in Allentown, I saw your number on the chart there, was from a few years ago. It's 60 million now. That's going out the door. So between Bethlehem and Allentown, we're pushing $100 million that are leaving the school districts to pay for charter schools that don't perform any better overall than the districts that are paying for them. So I think that's the big question. If we had a program that we were spending millions of dollars on, that a new innovative program like charters that didn't have any positive impacts, we could not justify continuing to fund it. So the finances, I think, is the biggest challenge right now. And I think there could be some changes to that. On the authorization of charter schools, definitely agree. And the reauthorization, there needs to be more teeth in the law to support districts when they want to deny a charter, when they don't think it's good enough to open, or they don't want to renew it. What really happens is the law is written, the 1997 law is written in such a way that leans heavily towards getting charters approved. And school districts are really have a lot of handcuffs on them. It's really a legal process to make the decision. And then if you turn it down, it goes to the Charter Appeals Board that's been heavily in favor of charter schools, and it gets passed. So if districts had more of the authority, it's district taxpayer money that's going to these privately run charter schools, the districts ought to have more power over approving or closing charter schools. Now in Bethlehem, we have 3 charters located on our border, and they all do a good job. We haven't always agreed with them, but they're all 3 charters that we have good relationships with. But they don't perform better, but we're paying a lot of money for them to not perform better. So I think I'll close by saying the question for us, with the fixes we could do to the finances, the question for us is, why are we okay with pushing nearly $3 billion in public money, taxpayer money, to privately run charter schools? Charter schools boards are not accountable to the public. They're not elected by the public. They're privately selected, but they're publicly funded. So they can make decisions that is adverse to the good of the community, and they're not held accountable by the voters. if they're publicly funded, they should be accountable to the public. And that's my biggest concern about combining that politics with the financing puts us into the bad situation that I think we're in right now. The high quality versus low quality charter schools, I think I support stronger guidelines for that. Rubrics would be helpful, but then it can't take a 10-year legal process to close down a school that doesn't meet those requirements. And often those are the fights that we've seen around the state when that's happened. So what we have in common, I think we can agree. We have a tough job in urban schools, educating urban kids. And the more we can do to support the communities from which those kids come to our schools, charter or public, the better off all the schools would be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roy. Now we'll turn to Melissa Suarez, a parent leader from Philadelphia, to hear from her perspective on the topic.
Thank you all so much for having me come and speak here. Thank you to ML for inviting me, and Children's First. I want to thank the panel for being here as well. This has been a really great experience. I am a mother of 3 special education students in charter schools in Philadelphia County. I'm surprised at how much intersection my family has in some of these issues that I've learned from you guys just this morning. All 3 of my children attended public charter, and the day that we were accepted, I cried. I cried because I was so excited that my children had an opportunity, had choice, and we didn't have to go to our regular public school. When I thought about why I cried and why I was excited that day, when I thought about why I cried that morning that we got the acceptance letter from our charter school, it was because I was hoping that they had a vision just like I had when I was in school, where parents were engaged, where students were loving instruction, where there was opportunities for learning, where teachers took time with struggling students, but also gave the opportunity to students who were doing exceptionally well, and they met all of those needs in between. And I don't know how they did it, because that's amazing to do. That's really just hitting the mark for teachers. However, within the first 2 years of our children attending a charter school, my son began to have some reading issues. He began to struggle in a couple different academic areas, just like we saw here. Within 5 years, their needs outpaced our efforts. And when I say their needs, I have twins in 4th grade right now. Their needs have become so significant as special education students. We've asked our charter school, please help us. We're parents. We want to collaborate. We want to work with you to help close the gap for our children. And our school failed to meet their charter, failed to give us what they promised us before, which was that change in public schooling. And now it's very, very hard to tell the difference between what a public school in our neighborhood looks like and what our charter school looks like. And as a parent who really, really put forth a lot of effort into their education early and now, it is devastating. I'm not surprised. Our charter schools in Philadelphia, some of them have as high as 80% failing math, and then as high as 60% failing English. And that to me says the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. My children struggle more, they're going to continue to struggle. That trajectory as a parent is devastating. It's hard to swallow, it's hard to deal with. So what do? We don't have a school choice at this point. We're in a great charter school compared to some of the other charter schools and options in Philadelphia County. So how do I help my children? And that's kind of where this conversation within the community has to happen, is where do we go from here? I understand there are so many challenges, and I know that there are some really exceptional teachers working in our school systems. I should mention that. There are some teachers who are doing an exceptional job, and this is not to downplay you. I know that there's a system that needs to change in order to make our children learn better and to make the system better, and as a nation, we just grow. So I came here to help elevate parent voices who have had similar experiences, who for one reason or another believed that their charter school was going to give them a better option, was going to give them opportunity that they couldn't get at their public schools, that I wouldn't have to be afraid when I sent my child to school because something was going to happen to them or that violence was going to ensue in their classroom. But what I need from my charter school, what I need from Philadelphia, what I need from Pennsylvania is I need parent engagement. I need to be engaged in their learning. We all know that parents drive our children until they turn into teenagers and then, you know. But we need a shared governance. I heard some of the panelists talk about the boards. I know that our board makes a lot of decisions that my voice is not heard there. We need better accountability. That is one of the most important things to me is the accountability and the transparency in the data that we share. It's more than just a PSSA score. My sons with special education, a PSSA score does not sum who they are or what they can do. It's a measurement. All it does is measure one specific area, not their potential, not what they can do or who they can be. We need meaningful metrics. Meaningful metrics for special education students varies, but what we need to do is come together and figure out what those things would be and how they can best serve our children. Compliance reports and helping the most vulnerable students. This is something I strongly believe in. We are only as strong as we help the most vulnerable of our populations right now. That is our underserved children. So I don't think it's unreasonable to say I'm asking for what we were promised. What the charter schools had initially offered us, that is all we're requesting. This is nothing new. We just have some more conditions because it hasn't been fully provided before. I think we all want the same thing. We want our children to be well educated, to have opportunities where there were none before. But in order to do that, we need help. We need to work together. We need to work for change. We need to unite instead of separate or divide. That's all. Thank you so much for letting me be here.
And now we're going to wrap up the panel with a virtual appearance by Representative Joe Ciresi. I think someone who most in this room know as a fierce educational leader, member of the House Education Committee. And we now have Joe on the screen. Welcome. Welcome, and I hope you can hear me.
Thank you. I hear you. I unmute myself. I apologize. And I'm sorry I can't be there. I have a meeting in Pottstown right after this, which is one of my most unrepresented school districts as far as funding. It's the fifth most unfunded district.
Bad connection. Bad
I
connection.
want to thank the whole panel for being there. It's been an interesting conversation. I want to say something directly to Melissa because she is a parent. I got involved in this whole process as a parent. I ran for school board when my son was 3 for the reason of wanting to be part of his educational experience. And Melissa, we have an obligation to you and your children as a Commonwealth to make sure they have everything that they need. And that's our job. And I hear you. I want you to know you're being heard every day that we sit on that panel. And this is something that we want to see. Parent engagement. I was a parent who got engaged. I ran for school board. And my wife was on the PTA, so we were in the schools as much as we can be. There were a lot of things said that I took pages of notes as went along, but I want to say something that I found a little bit disturbing about the safety of our schools and our students. We strive to make sure that every school is safe, and I'm blessed that the district I served in, we have a true police force within our school districts to make sure our schools are safe. I don't want anyone to come out of this meeting thinking that our schools are not safe throughout the Commonwealth. This is not an issue that we deal with. And when that word came up, it really bothered me a lot about school safety. But let's talk about what we have in common. That's what this is about. We have in common that everyone sitting in that room, and myself, and really across the Commonwealth, wants to see our kids have a great public education. Or a great education in general. Wants to give our students every opportunity they can to help them advance, to help them through their life experiences. I don't think anyone is sitting here going, we don't care about the kids, we just want the money. But where's the breakdown is what the question comes in. The law that was written 25 years ago needs to be relooked at. There are issues in the law. And Superintendent, you pointed out a lot of the issues that we talk about. You almost pointed out my whole bill, to be honest with you. I appreciate that for some of the changes that need to happen. But I also heard from Dr. Clark on her issues that she discussed, and she makes some good points about what needs to happen. Now, I'm going to say something to you, Dr. Clark. You may not appreciate it, but as a board member of 12 years, as president of the board, not once in my time was I invited into the charter school that resides in the district next to mine, where we sent over $2 million to. Until I became a representative, then I was invited in. And I took offense to that. Why weren't we invited in to see the good things that went on in that building? There were a lot of great things. I mean, I happen to be close to Renaissance Academy, which I think is a very well-run building, very well-run institution. But we have no say in what happens in that building. And you brought up about board members and board members training. We went through training every year through PSBA and other organizations to be trained on how to be a board member. We went through every law that we had to understand, that we had to comply by in the state of Pennsylvania. And where we have a great divide is that as board members, as 9 non-paid volunteers within our community who are responsible, at least in my district in Springford, for over $200 million of the taxpayer money, we have to hold public meetings that are advertised on a monthly basis. There's 2 meetings that are held. We have to show our budget to the public. We have to put it out months prior to the approval of the budget and have people come in. Not once in 12 years that I sat on that board were we ever invited in to the charter school to hear their board meeting or to see their budget presented to us. I feel that there's a way that we can cause this issue maybe to close a little bit and see us coming together with these charters, is to take an elected official from the district that chartered the charter, and they sit on the board of the charter school. Now you may say, well, what sense does that make? Well, in our IUs and in our vocational schools, that's how it works. It's the money that we're sending. And originally I said, well, every school district that sends somebody should have a member on the board of the charter. That's crazy. I know that it could be 50 people that would sit on that board. But the chartering school should have that opportunity to be a board member there, to hear what's presented, and then to be able to go back to their district and present what's been going on and the great things or the failure things that they may feel, just like we do at our IUs and our vocational schools. There's a lot more alike than it's not. And I think the frustration comes in for us as elected officials, and I'm going to go back to my former position as a school board member, is that we don't have access. We're not invited in. Springford was finally invited into the charter school here because I became a board member, and all of a sudden the superintendent had an opportunity to walk in that building and went, okay, I understand how some of these things work. But there's no oversight, like the things that the superintendent brought up that we can easily fix. Those things should be fixed. Why is there being pushback on those issues? To the overpayment of special ed, the state reimbursements, the difference between the way that the performance of the charter is. If we're giving money for something that's supposed to be a higher performing, then it should be a higher performer. We shouldn't be giving $2.6 billion with a B dollars to something that's performing the same way. And you're right. Dr. Clark, you're 100% right. Do you have issues in public education that need to be improved? I'm with you all the way through. We need to look at public education throughout the Commonwealth and find the issues that we have and improve them. But we also need to make sure that when we send a check in the millions, and my districts alone, it's about, I know if we make some of the changes to the cyber charter, my districts combined will get somewhere between, I think, $6 and $7 million back into the school systems. But it's in the millions that we're sending out, then we should know they should perform. Now, our governor has said over and over again, he's not a fan of standardized testing and would like to see that disappear. And I support Governor Shapiro on that 100%. I was not a great student when I was a student. I was a musician. I ended up becoming a musician, a professional musician. Thank God for music. We're supported in our schools, but some of our schools don't have the opportunity to support those programs, to grab back those kids. And I understand in the city of the first class in Philadelphia, where they have a majority of the students, the biggest percentage that go to charter schools, the issues that we have there. I understand how hard they've been working to try and make up the difference in public education, the way it's funded. But in suburbia, where we are, this is also a major issue with the way charter schools perform and the way public schools perform. And it's something that we need to come to the table for, but it can no longer have us kick the can down the lane. 25 years, that law has been in effect. There must be change now. And either we come together and work together for the solution, or we don't, but we can no longer wait. The time is now. The lawsuit showed the deficiencies that we have. We know where some of our charters are not performing or are performing, and we should be able to praise those that are performing well, same way we should on public education. But we cannot wait another year, another 3 years. And I want to say, I've said I want to say a lot of times, I apologize, but I want to make it clear that I am in no way, no fashion against the choice of parents sending their kids to charter schools. I'm all for that. If that's where you feel your children will perform better, that's your choice. But you have to be held to the same exact standards as public education. And that's where I feel we have failed, that we are not holding everyone to the exact same standards. We saw recently where a reading specialist, a child needed a reading specialist, and in a public school, the reading specialist may cost the public school, let's say $1,000 a year. The charter school was charging $16,000 a year. That's not fair. That's not fair to the public education system, nor to the taxpayers. And we tend to forget about the taxpayers who are paying for these schools. We tend to forget that almost 70% of the people who pay for public education don't have kids in schools any longer. Where's our obligation to them to find the cost savings, to make sure that these children who are going through the system have everything they need in a cost-efficient manner? So I'm not going to take up a lot more time of this. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. Dr. Clark, I want to thank you for being here. It's nice to be able to be in a room with the charter schools and have a real conversation with them. And I look forward to the opportunity to work with you. Melissa, once again, I say to you, we have an obligation to your 3 children that we should be helping you. You should not have to feel like they're left behind. It is our obligation as a state to make sure that there is no child that feels that way or family. I look forward to continuing this conversation and finding the pathway forward that makes sure that every one of our students has everything they need and the opportunities that they need to have. So thank you for having me here. I apologize again that I couldn't be live in the studio. I'd like to have been there, but I need to get off now and go up to Pottstown for another meeting up there. So thank you all very much.
Well, and thank you, Representative Ciresi. And to wrap up the program, I'm going to turn to my colleague Priyanka, K-12 Policy Director at Children First.
Thanks, ML. Hello, everyone, and good morning. Like ML said, my name is Priyanka Reyes-Kaura. I'm the K-12 Education Policy Director at Children First. I'm also a proud graduate of Pennsylvania's traditional public school system and a former charter school teacher as well. So based on this phenomenal panel, I think we can all agree that there's a lot of energy and a lot of momentum, and also a lot of well-informed people on all sides of these complex issues. I really want to thank everyone for speaking today and sharing your varied experiences. Today, we heard from an expert on Pennsylvania charter school performance. We also heard from a charter school leader, a superintendent, and 2 committed parents. And all of you have so much to bring to this conversation. So thank you again. I wanted to just reflect on a few of the topics that I heard come up in this conversation and some of the nuance that they brought. In addition to learning about the performance of charter schools across our state, we also heard our panelists discuss other issues which are very related, such as the teacher shortages, such as the role of test scores in accountability, and the need for both parent voice and the role of school boards as well when it comes to thinking about how charter schools perform. When we think about all of our schools in Pennsylvania, we know that they serve all of our students, and charter schools in particular were founded to support all students, but especially Black, Hispanic, and low-income students. Both types of schools, traditional public schools and public charter schools, are struggling with some of the same structural barriers to do with which all stem from school funding. We know that combined, our schools in Pennsylvania are facing a shortage of over $4 billion below what it would take to have adequate education funding. It seems like in the education world, we're often talking about us versus them, charter schools versus traditional public schools. But the reality is that public schools and public schools and public charter schools have more in common than we often like to admit. I want to thank everyone who attended this event today, both in person and our virtual attendees. And I also would like to thank everyone at PBS 39 who hosted this fantastic event. Thank you so much. Everyone who registered will receive a copy of the report and a link to the recording as well. And we thank you again for engaging on this very important issue.